of the things that I do from time to time here in the studio is repair items, getting them working just right so that I can demonstrate them to you in a video. Now, when it comes to record players, turntables, it's a little bit more complicated than some other things because they need to be plugged into an external device to be able to hear them back. So it ends up looking a lot like this. Now, this kind of setup here takes me quite a while to do, and it's a bit complicated, needs lots of different components, because as well as having the record player, more often than not I'll need a phono preamp which is plugged into an amplifier, and of course then there's speakers plugged into that. Overall, there's just a heck of a lot of wires, and we're also using up 3 plug sockets just to listen back to one record. Now, from time to time, people will get in touch with me and say they've got hold of an old turntable, perhaps one that they found in their attic that used to be their dad's or something, plugged it into their existing amplifier, because of course it's got the 2 phono or RCA plugs on the back, and it didn't sound right. It sounded much too quiet and quite weird as well, a little bit tinny more often than not, very thin sounding. And I've had to explain to these people you can't plug a lot of record players directly into a modern amp. You do need to use a thing called a phono preamp in between those. You plug the record player into those, and then the output from that then goes into the amplifier. What it does is it boosts the sound that comes out of the record player, which is very quiet, not the same volume level as your normal cassette player or CD player. It's a lot quieter than that, so it does need an extra power supply to boost that. But back in the days when vinyl record sales were at their heights, most amplifiers would have a phono preamp built in. You'd have a separate input on the back to plug your record player directly into, and the circuitry inside would do the boost, and you'd have a selection you could make on the front when you wanted to listen back to records. Modern amplifiers don't tend to have that. They've just got the auxiliary inputs which would take anything other than a record player, and therefore you need to boost that signal using the phono preamp, and you end up with the mess that I've got sat in front of me here. Now, there are a couple of things you could do to simplify this down. Rather than using a separate amp and speakers, I could use some powered speakers, and that would reduce the number of things on the table here. Now, these powered speakers, these Kanto YU3s that I reviewed a couple of years ago, very happy with these, but they're in use in another room. But still, if you want to plug a record player into the back of these, you'll need to use a separate phono preamp. It's just got your normal RCA inputs on there. I'd really like to do away with this preamp business. It's just creating a lot of mess and wiring that I think is a bit unnecessary. So, if you were to get a modern turntable, of course, you can get them with built-in preamps, and that's because they're expecting nowadays you don't have an amplifier with a phono input on it. However, I'm not reviewing those. I'm looking at older things I'm trying to repair, get working and demonstrate to you, and those definitely do need that separate input. So I went on Twitter asking around to see if anyone had heard of a speaker system with a built-in preamp. It sounded like a normal thing. Nobody could find one. I couldn't find one either. Some people suggested perhaps I could look at these microphone speakers or perhaps a guitar amplifier, and those are both very sensible suggestions because both of those devices boost very weak signals up to much stronger ones, much like a phono preamp does. However, a phono preamp has something built in that those things don't, and that's RIAA equalization, and that's required to be able to get a record to sound correct. Once you've amplified it, without that it's going to sound very thin. Anyway, we drew a blank. We couldn't find a speaker or speaker system with built-in phono preamps, so I gave up for a couple of months. But then just last week I started looking again. I thought maybe this time I'll make my own phono preamp speaker combination up. I'll buy a separate phono preamp, get a speaker, take the back off it and somehow wire the two things together. But I did one last search and there's one out now. Between me thinking about it and now, somebody's come out with one, and it happens to be the people that made the speaker that I showed you earlier on, Kanto. It's the YU4, so they've got a powered speaker with a built-in phono preamp. However, it's only really affordable in the US. Once you look at it in the UK, it's pretty expensive. It's like £300 at the moment on Amazon. But just like the Kantos, there are various other versions of these speakers that are from other manufacturers. I'm sure the insides are pretty similar, but they've just been packaged differently. So in the UK, it's able to be picked up for £100 less than the equivalent price of the Kanto by getting the Roth VA4. So I picked one of these up and let me show it to you now. So I suppose we've only got the recent vinyl resurgence to thank for the introduction of these. Now, whenever I mention vinyl in a video, the comments below always degenerate into some big argument of people saying vinyl is rubbish and CD's best and FLAC's better than MP3. I don't have a horse in that race. I'll play anything. Doesn't matter to me. One doesn't have to lose for the other one to win. They all coexist in my household. Now let's have a look at these speakers anyway. Notice I've got the red ones here. They've got removable grills on the front, but I like the colour there. I know some people probably won't, but I think they stand out, make it look quite interesting. Now on the back of here, quite a few inputs. We've got the RCAs, which we can swap between having them as a line input or using the phono preamp that's built in. You've got a ground on there, very important for plugging a record player in to avoid hum. We've got the 3.5mm input on there, optical in, volume, which if you press it that will move between the different inputs, USB charger on there, the sub out, if you want to put a powered sub on this you can do, and then we've got the power across the bottom and the connectors to connect one speaker to the other, which are binding posts, and also you could plug a banana plug in the back of that if you wanted to. The other things inside the box included a kettle plug power lead, or if you want to be pedantic, an IEC C13 plug. We've got sticky back rubber feet, a speaker cable, and a 3.5mm mini jack to RCA left and right, and we've got the instruction booklet. Now I'll just show you the specs out of this on the screen. If you want to read these, press pause now. Oh, sorry, too late. Now, as far as these sticky back feet go, I've seen people complain on some videos, say, why do I have to stick my own feet on? This is ridiculous. Well, it's entirely optional, of course. You might want to put these things wall-mounted or on some kind of stand or something. You might not necessarily want to use those feet, but if you do use them because you're putting them on a flat surface like this, it will prevent the thing rattling around, give it some dampening. I've attached both speakers together using the supplied speaker cable, and the wire coming out of my turntable has this grounding spade on here, so I can put that on that binding post, just tighten that in there, and then use the RCA inputs to plug the left and right output from my turntable into those, and then also make sure that I've activated the phono preamp by moving the switch over into the phono position. So all that remains now is to put the power lead in the back and switch the speakers on. There's just one thing I haven't shown you yet though, and that's the remote control, so let's just have a quick look at it. Across the top here we've got the standby button and access to all the different inputs, controls in the middle for the Bluetooth connected devices as well as mute, and then at the bottom there we've got bass, treble and volume. The only thing I don't like about it is it feels a little bit sticky, a bit grippy to hold. It's powered off a CR2025 battery, just take the protection off that and we're ready to go. Now, I've yet to get around to getting some copyright-free vinyl press from the YouTube audio library, so I'm going to have to talk over this record because I don't have the copyright for it. I will mention having the volume control on the back of the speaker is a little bit inconvenient. However, you're able to use the remote control, so that's that problem solved. And of course, you've got a mute button on there as well. If you get the Kanto speakers, they do have a volume control on the front. However, all this means I can now get rid of my phono preamp finally and just put that away in a drawer somewhere. It's much neater, this setup. It also does away with one power brick, which is always good if you can use less power sockets. So overall, very neat system. It does sound good as well. As I say, I can't play it from this record. What I can do though is play you some audio connected over Bluetooth. I'll play you some YouTube audio library stuff through there. Of course, that won't sound the same as a vinyl record, but over YouTube you probably won't better tell. Anyway, so let's just have a listen. Pressing that reset button brings the bass, treble and volume back to the default levels, and the default for the volume is whatever you set it to using the control on the back of the speaker itself. Now the next thing I want to do is try out this optical input, because you could plug this into various devices, but one thing it suggests in the manual is plugging it into the back of a television to improve the sound quality. So let's just have a listen to how much difference it actually makes.
We talked about it. I was very shocked that no one came and get him in the Premier League. He's a great guy. He can score goals. He's doing well in the 21 also for France. They're talking about him maybe going into the national team. So what you're going to get, and he knows the English game a bit. He never played in the Premier League, but
now, I'm sure it's obvious even through YouTube that these speakers have a heck of a lot more richness and body than the built-in television ones, but then again, of course, they should do. Now, one thing I'm showing you here is that when you switch the speakers off and put them back on again, they remember the last input they were on, which I think is very useful, especially if you are using them attached to a television. And they even remember the input once you've pulled the power and put it back in again, and I think that's a nice feature. Now, as I mentioned, in the UK, these aren't not the cheapest of speakers. They are £200. There are other models in the range without the built-in phono preamp, but I do think they are a very good speaker. They sound fine to me. Very nice, good quality of sound. Very neat, of course. Much better for me to use in the studio here when I'm demonstrating things or testing them out for myself. If you want to get hold of some, I've got links in the video description for both those ones available in the US and this UK version. But that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.